Well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joni Parsons. I'm co-creator of Revel 11 along with Monica Smith. Monica, say hi to everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. We created Revel 11 to bring informative, edgy, and very fun events and retreats to women around the globe. We're so glad that you are here with us today. Melanie and I have been talking about doing something together for several years, as a matter of fact. I'm so grateful to have this industry veteran here today to share her knowledge with us. She will be talking about the steps that you need to take to start writing and sharing your wisdom and experiences with the world. She's an award-winning author, ghostwriter, editor, and book coach who has been working in the publishing industry for more than 20 years. Wow, that's amazing, Melanie. She has worked with Hay House, Penguin, Macmillan, and many others. She specializes in spiritual self-help books and memoirs. And she teaches a 6-month online Finish Your Book group coaching program, which is amazing, I've heard, and runs the Finish Your Book with Melanie Votaw Facebook community. Melanie, welcome to Revel 11.
Thanks so much, Joni. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so thrilled to have you. We've been talking about this for so long, and I know that we're going to be doing something, a retreat in the future as well.
Yes, I can't wait for that. When we can all get on planes and
we're free and share space again together. That will be so, I will be so grateful when that happens.
Me too. Won't we all? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, welcome and take it away.
All right. Well, as I said, I'm in New York, so I think I don't know that we have any East Coasters with us yet. But the first thing I want to do is ask you some questions, and you can answer them in the chat. The first question is, how many of you have always wanted to write a self-help book? Now, I'm going to clarify that a self-help book is any book that teaches. It doesn't have to be spiritual. Any book that teaches something is considered self-help in the industry. How many of you have always wanted to? And if you can remember how long you've wanted to, then write that in the chat as well. My next question is, how many of you started a book, but you never finished it? And then how many of you have finished a book, but never published it? So I know some of you may have already published a book, but you're here because you're curious about what the benefits are to writing a book. And I know that many of you have probably thought about writing a book or maybe started one and turned it into an orphan, either on the computer or in a drawer somewhere. But I know that if you feel that impulse to write a book, if you have that compulsion, if you feel that calling, that it eats at you, it eats at you until you do it. And I know some people where it's been eating at them for years and they keep trying to ignore it. But I firmly believe that if you do feel that calling, that you're meant to do it. And that it's important to answer that call. So I've been on a mission to encourage people to answer that call and to get it done. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about my 5 top ways that writing a self-help book can improve your life. I've seen it happen many, many times. But then that's probably going to take about 15 minutes because then I want to talk to you about the publishing industry because there are so many misconceptions about it. And I see people getting tripped up as they're trying to write and publish a book. So I want to dispel some of that. And lastly, I want to talk to you about how you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to write a book alone. You don't have to be that solitary person in the room with all the pieces of paper on the floor. You don't have to do that. Okay, so we'll talk about that too. But first, let's talk about the 5 ways. So I'm going to ask Hannah, if she will, to start my PowerPoint. Get the slides going. There we go. Okay. Can you go to the next one? And then go to the next one. There we go. Okay. So our number one way that writing a self-help book can improve your life is that it presents your wisdom to the world and establishes you as an expert instantly. And let me tell you, that can be life-changing, truly. You can launch a coaching business. You can launch a speaking business from writing your first book. I've seen it happen many times. One of the authors that I work with is Nancy Levin. She's okay with me disclosing that. I've worked with her on 4 books. She is published by Hay House. And I think before she published her first book, she hadn't been coaching for all that long. Since then, she has just had an unbelievable coaching business. She does individuals, she does groups, she has membership programs. Last year, she launched her own coaching academy to train coaches. So there's no limit to what you can do with a book. Now, I know Nancy had Hay House behind her, and yes, it does make a difference, but I've seen plenty of people who have self-published without a big publisher behind them also launch coaching businesses and go very far with them just from that first book that they've published. So if you do your book well, and by well, I mean that you work with an editor who makes sure that it's up to industry standard, because you want your book to be just as good as those books that are coming out from Random House. If you do that and represent your brand well, it is the most robust business card that you can have. So that is way number 1. Hannah, can you switch the slides next? Okay, number 2, and I'm going to switch my pages so that I keep up with the slides we're on. The next one is it shows you what you can do and gives you a huge, and I mean huge, sense of accomplishment. I'm not going to lie, writing a book is a lot of work. I know some of you already know that because you probably started working on one or maybe even written a whole one. It is a lot of work, and it takes months, maybe a year, if you work on it continually to finish. And I know some people work over a course of years because they kind of go back and forth. They work on a little while and they abandon it and then go back. So yes, it is a lot of work, but I know that you also know from your experience that the amount of work you put into something is commensurate with the amount of satisfaction and achievement that you feel when you're done. So what I have found is that there's just nothing like it. There's just nothing like the feeling of accomplishment that you have after you've written a book. It's sort of like birthing a baby, really. You birth this wonderful thing and then you send it out into the world like you do a child, hoping that it will do well. In fact, when I work with authors on a book and we're done, I send them an email with a picture of a cigar on it that says, "Congratulations, it's a book," because it really does feel like you've birthed something. And pretty much every author I've worked with has felt like a new person after finishing their book. I'm not exaggerating. It may still feel like I'm speaking in hyperboles, but I'm really not. It really, really is like that. Okay, Hannah, next one. All right, number 3. It takes you out of your comfort zone and it makes you braver. And I think writing a book shows you that being out of your comfort zone is actually pretty good, so that you can translate that courage and that bravery into other aspects of your life. I have watched authors go on to do so many brave things, like launch their coaching business, do interviews on television, start podcasts. What else do I have on my list here? Create partnerships, sometimes with corporations, lead groups and trainings, just all sorts of things. that they wouldn't have had the courage to do beforehand. So I think writing a book shows you what you're capable of. And it allows you to step into a bigger version of yourself that's more aligned with your greatest potential, with who you really are, really, because you're putting yourself out there and saying, this is what I know. So it, I think, helps you to step into your authenticity as who you really are and who you want to be. I get a little bit verklempt thinking about it because it really is that powerful. Okay, number 4. It forces you to take stock of your own transformational process and discover how much you've learned and grown. It's really an interesting thing that I've discovered as I've worked with people who are writing these books, and as I've written some myself. You have to really think about what you know. You have to take stock of what you know in a very specific way. And most of the time you discover that you know more than you realized you knew. You discover that, oh my gosh, I really did do that. I really did have that trajectory. Try to work around my microphone here. You have that trajectory from point A to point B that you have gone from. And it really allows you to see how much has happened in your life, which is pretty exciting. And I've also found that for a lot of authors, it allows them to sort of streamline what they've learned. And many of them have created a process. The process of writing it down in a book allows them to make what they know more teachable, more coachable, and clearer. So some of them, even some who've had a process already and have been working with individuals or with groups for years, suddenly find that it's more streamlined, that it's clearer, and they've adopted what they've written in the book for their work with people. Some of them have created trainings from that. So it really is a very exciting way to discover what you know. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I want to write a book like this, but I don't think I want to create a process or anything. I don't know that I really think that way. You don't have to. Some people do, some people don't. It doesn't have to be a set process. But even so, the process of writing the book is going to help you discover that you knew more, that you know more than you realized you did. And that is very confidence boosting and very gratifying. All right. I think I said all I wanted to say on that one. Yes. So next one. All right. This is the last one of the 5 ways, and then we're going to talk about publishing. It allows you to make a difference in the world and help others. And that's probably the most exciting one, because isn't that the main reason why most of us want to write a book like this? We want to somehow have an impact on people, to help them. And we need books like that, don't we? We need more books like that. I don't think there's any such thing as too many transformational books, whether it's a spiritual transformation or a business transformation or a nutrition transformation, whatever it is. If you're teaching someone something, it's transformational. So from a ego selfish perspective, you get the pleasure and satisfaction of knowing that you're helping people. It gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning in your life, which is something that we all need desperately and want desperately. I know that most of the authors that I've worked with have received thank you notes from their readers. Some of them have received notes that said, "This book changed my life. Thank you so much." Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, I don't know if my book would do that. I don't know if anybody would find it that helpful. I don't know if I'd ever get a note like that. Well, let me tell you, every single one of those authors that got notes, they thought the same thing. They thought, oh, I don't know if my book will ever actually have that kind of impact. I don't know if anybody would ever write me a note saying it helped them? They all thought that. And yet they got those notes. And there's just, oh, it's just such an amazing feeling. And think about the fact that writing a book allows you to leave a legacy behind. You don't know. Your book is like a child. It's out there in the world doing things, touching people that you'll never know about. And years from now, maybe even after you're gone, your book might be on somebody's shelf that they read 10, 15, 20 years ago. And maybe their child comes in, looks at their parents' shelf and sees your book and pulls it off the shelf and goes, oh, this looks interesting. Let me read this. And they find, oh, wow, this is exactly what I needed to hear right now. This really helps me. And then maybe they pass it along to somebody else, or somebody picks it up at an estate sale or at a thrift shop years after it's out of print. You just never know what your book can do. If you knew unequivocally that your book could change the life of one person, a single person, wouldn't it be worth sitting down and writing it? Just think about that for a second. Wouldn't it? So that's why I urge you to really consider doing this, not putting it off anymore, but actually doing it. Can we get the next slide? Imagine that someone writes to you to tell you how much your book has meant to them. Just imagine that for a second. Just really let that in. What would that feel like? It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Okay, those are my 5 ways. It's that simple, but that powerful. Yeah, I'm going to need some water here. I'm also going to put a little cough drop in my mouth to keep my throat lubricated. Because when I start talking a lot, I tend to get this little cough. So next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk about publishing now. And some of this is a reality check, okay? So I don't want to feel like I just built you up and I'm bringing you down, okay? I want to tell you before I start this, that whatever I tell you about the publishing industry that may sound like a bummer, so many people have published books happily and successfully, regardless of any of these things, okay? So don't let any of them get you down. But first of all, I want to make something clear that I think is often not clear to people. A lot of things in the publishing industry are a little hazy, a little confusing. But one thing that is crystal clear and sort of black and white is the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing. With traditional publishing, which is like with a publisher like Hay House or Random House, the publisher gives you money to write your book, okay? With self-publishing, you give the publisher money to write your book, to publish your book, okay? That is very black and white. If you're giving somebody money to publish your book, I don't care what they call it. I don't care what kind of label they put on it. It is self-publishing. It is not traditional publishing. In this respect, the publishing industry is just that simple, okay? All right, let's see. Okay, I don't think I want to go to the next slide yet. I want to explain some things first, okay? There are a lot of self-publishing companies that try to pretend that they are traditional publishers. And they do this, I think, in a way that isn't ethical. Okay, so you do need to be careful when you are thinking about publishing a book. So how do you figure out which are which? Okay, there are ways that you can do this. When you go on a publisher's website, if that publisher is trying to sell the publisher's name to you, if they're talking about packages or services, it's a self-publisher, okay? They want to sell you on them so that you will pay them to publish your book. If you go to a traditional publisher's website like Penguin Random House or Hay House or New World Library or any of those, they are more selling the books that they have published. They're not so much selling the name of the publisher. And they won't mention packages or services. They'll have a page probably that says submission guidelines. So that's one way that you can tell the difference between the two, okay? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with self-publishing companies, but some are more ethical than others. And some will try to take advantage of you if you're not careful. So let's talk a little bit about how the traditional publishing world works. Traditional publishers will take a full manuscript of a novel or a memoir. They will not take a full manuscript of a self-help book. This is kind of one of those bummers, all right? For a self-help book, traditional publishers want what we call a book proposal. And a proposal is like a business plan for your book. They want to have some say in how the book is structured. So they want to see what you intend to do with the book before you write it. And a book proposal has a whole bunch of different sections. It can be 50 to 75 pages in and of itself. And it contains about 20 pages of the book itself. So usually for a proposal, we write about 2 chapters for the proposal. And then we have all these other sections in it. The other thing about traditional publishers is that most of them, the big ones especially, will not take a book proposal directly from you. They will only take it from a literary agent. Okay, so now let's talk about literary agents because that's a whole nother thing. And definitely if questions come up as I'm talking, please write them in the chat. Go ahead and write them while they're at top of mind, and then we'll come back to them at the end, okay? So I don't want you to lose your questions as I'm talking. So literary agents. There is nobody policing literary agents. That means anybody can call themselves that. So again, you have to be careful because some of them are not ethical. If a literary agent or somebody who calls themselves that says, pay me so much money and I will get your book published, please run fast in the other direction because that is not the way that it's supposed to work, okay? Literary agents work on contingency. You know how, I know this, it's like this in the US. I'm not sure if it's like this in the UK, but when a lawyer accepts your personal injury case, if you get injured and they accept your case, they don't make any money unless they get a settlement for you. Literary agents are similar. And that's why they're so picky, because they need to sell your book to a publisher before they make any money. So they don't want to take on somebody that they don't feel they can sell to a publisher. And then once they sell your book to a publisher, they take about 15% of the money that the publisher gives you. Sometimes they take a percentage of the royalties as well. All right, now let's talk about royalties and money a little bit. When a traditional publisher gives you money to publish your book, that's called an advance. And the reason it's called an advance is because it's an advance against the royalties. See, a lot of people believe that they get the advance and then they get a percentage of every sale of every book. Not quite. You get the advance, and then the advance has to be paid back through the royalties to the publisher. So let's say the publisher gives you $10,000 to publish your book. Your book has to sell enough copies to pay back that $10,000 to the publisher before you start getting a percentage of each sale of your book. So it is literally an advance against the royalties. And it's true that a lot of books never sell enough to pay back that advance or to make any additional royalties. I always tell authors, don't count on making any more money than that advance that they've given you when you start writing your book. So that's part of the reality of traditional publishing. We'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons in a second, but that gives you the basis, and I hope that's clear for everybody. So now let's talk a little bit about the self-publishing world. There's no shame in self-publishing whatsoever. It is a perfectly viable way to get your book out there. And for some people, it's going to be the only way. And the reason is that traditional publishers want to know that the book is going to sell so that they can keep their business going. So they want you to have what we call a platform or a big following of people who already know who you are and are going to want to buy your book just because of who you are. 3,000 followers on Facebook, they don't consider that very much. They're looking for like 50, 60,000. That is the big publishers. There are smaller publishers, if you don't have that kind of following, who might be interested in your book. And it's perfectly fine to go with a smaller publisher. Sometimes you get more attention, and sometimes it's really nice to work with a small publisher. And some of them will even take your book proposal without a literary agent, which can be very nice. So you can submit to them directly. So don't write off the smaller publishers. They can do a lot for you as well. So some of you have heard of hybrid publishing, right? Well, hybrid publishing doesn't have a set definition, really. There are a lot of different models for it out there, but hybrid publishing is still self-publishing. It could just be that a hybrid publisher is not just publishing anything. I mean, there are self-publishers out there who will publish a book that just has the word the on 100 pages. They don't care. Some hybrid publishers do care. They have a company name that they want to have respect. So they will only accept certain manuscripts to publish, but you're still paying them to publish it. Here's where it gets especially tricky. Hybrid publishers cost a lot usually. They take a lot of your money to publish your book. And they take a big chunk of the royalties. They take a big chunk of the money that comes in from each sale of the book. And a lot of them promise a lot of things. Some of them live up to those promises. Some of them don't. So you have to do your due diligence when you're looking at hybrid publishers and you're thinking about that. Talk to authors that they have worked with and make sure that those authors have been happy with what they've gotten. Have they gotten what was promised? Because some of them will promise you that they can get your book into a bookstore, or they can get you lots of publicity. They can get you interviews on TV. They can get you reviews. And it can be very difficult to get all of those things for a self-published book. So sometimes I'm very skeptical that they can do the things that they've promised to do. So just be really, really careful. It doesn't mean that hybrid publishers aren't reputable. Many of them are. I know some people who own some of those companies, and they're great companies. And there's no reason to not look at them if that's something you're interested in, but you can do it yourself. In my Facebook group, I have a self-publishing checklist that walks you through the steps of publishing your book yourself. That means that you get to keep the profits from every sale of your book. You can make up a name of your own publishing company. You do have to hire your own cover designer. You do have to hire your own editor. You do have to hire your own typesetter who does the internal design, but it's still cheaper 9 times out of 10 than working with a hybrid publisher. But a lot of people just don't want to do all that legwork, which is totally understandable. So if you have the money, some of you might want to work with a hybrid publisher. Okay, let me make sure that I covered everything I wanted to say there. I know it's a lot to take in. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. So let's just talk about the pros and the cons of each scenario. The pros of traditional publishing are that you get paid in advance for your book, which is a big perk. You get that money. The publisher then pays for all the design and the printing. The publisher takes care of the distribution, and they might be able to get you into brick and mortar bookstores. Now, that doesn't mean they absolutely will, because even big publishers like Random House don't get every single book that they publish in bookstores. So there's no guarantee of that. And the biggest perk to traditional publishing is that your book has the credibility of the publisher's reputation behind it, which is huge. It's not absolutely necessary, as I've seen millions of times, but it is a really big help. Okay, next slide. All right, the cons of traditional publishing. You have to create that book proposal, and you have to find a literary agent, at least in most cases for the big publishers, to get a publishing contract. It can be difficult to get a traditional publishing contract because of what I was saying about the platform, the following that you need to have to get their attention in most cases. The publisher will also want a certain amount of control over your title and the structure of your book. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's actually a good thing because they know what they're doing. They know what sells well. They know what readers like. But a lot of people really hate that because they want to have full control over their book. Now, here's a biggie. This is a big con with traditional publishing. It can take a year, sometimes 2, after your book has been sold by a literary agent to a publisher, before that book actually comes out in the marketplace. It can take a long time. And this is probably the main reason why a lot of people I know opt not to go with a traditional publisher, even if they have the following, because they don't want to wait that long. If you're self-publishing, you can do it much faster. So that's a big con, I think. I don't know why it takes so long. I still don't know why it takes so long. Now, with traditional publishing, they will help you with publicity a bit. But one of the bummers is that they still expect you to do most of it. So in that respect, it's not all that much different from self-publishing. You're still expected to do the bulk of the promotion for your book. So next slide. Let's talk about the pros of self-publishing. You make more money per book sale. If you publish it yourself without going with a publishing company that takes any royalties, you make every penny of profit. You have complete control over the product. Nobody gets to tell you what the title is, what the content is, what the structure is. You can release your book whenever you are ready. So if you have a business that you're trying to launch, a coaching business or a training or a speaking engagement, you can time it exactly with that. You don't have to create the book proposal, which is kind of a bummer. It really is kind of a bummer. But if you are interested in traditional publishing, it's a necessity and totally worth it. Here's the other perk. You can use your book to develop a following rather than develop a following before you get a book contract. So a lot of people do that. In fact, they write their first book and self-publish it as a way of building the numbers of their social media or YouTube followers or email list. And then they're able to get a traditional publisher for their second book. But here's another thing, and you might want to write this one down, okay? Because this comes from the CEO of Hay House. He says that if you self-publish and you are able to sell 5,000 copies of your book in the first year that it's out, that you have a very good chance of getting a traditional publisher interested in picking it up and republishing it under their brand. Now, selling 500 copies is not easy, but it's absolutely doable. People do it. You might need to spend some money on a marketer or a publicist to help you, but people do it. So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking in that direction. Okay, next slide. The cons of self-publishing. You don't get any money from a publisher, so you have to pay for everything yourself. You have to pay for the editing, the design, and the printing. It is very difficult to get a self-published book in a bookstore. Not many of the books you see in like a Barnes and Noble are self-published. That doesn't mean that you couldn't get your book maybe in a local, small, independent bookstore because you're local. You might be able to do that, especially if you offer to do a reading or a speaking engagement and a signing there. But getting into the big ones can be very difficult. It does happen, but not often. And of course, you don't have the credibility that a traditional publisher can provide if you self-publish. But like I said, don't let that deter you, please, because so many people self-publish and have been successful regardless of not having, Penguin Random House on the bottom. The truth is that if you get a really good professional looking cover that looks as good as the covers that are being put out by the big publishers, most people don't scroll down to see who the publisher was. So if the content is good and you start getting good reviews, the average reader isn't going to really care all that much. Okay. All right. Can we go to the next slide? Now I want to talk about how you don't have to write a book alone in a vacuum. You don't even have to be a great writer. Because if you think about it, if all the people who have wisdom to impart in a book had to be great writers, that would be a lot to ask. I mean, you're already an expert in one way, right? Do you have to also be an expert writer? I mean, my job is to be an expert writer, and that's all I do. So I think it's a lot to expect people to have expertise in their area and also in my area. That's why we have editors and ghostwriters and book coaches to help you. Every author you know and love has had help. If they didn't hire somebody before their publisher, they had help at the publisher. They had an editor at the publisher who helped them. Even the ones who were great writers had help. So there's no shame in getting help. In fact, I recommend it. And I recommend that you do it from the beginning, if possible. Let me give you a little cautionary tale. Last year, I worked with a woman who had spent years writing her book. So much brilliant stuff in it, but the structure of the book was not holding up. And so we had to rework it after the fact. And it took a lot more work to do that. We had to move things around. We had to rewrite some things. And she lamented the fact that she didn't know that she could have gotten help from the beginning to prevent having to redo so much of it. So I really encourage you to get help from a professional. There are lots of book coaches out there. Make sure that they have experience, and then make sure that you're simpatico with them. Make sure that they get you and what you're trying to communicate. I think that's vitally important. Let me just take a swig of water. Here's what a book coach can do for you, okay? They can help you figure out what the concept of your book is going to be if you don't know. Maybe you have a few ideas flying around and you're not sure which one is going to work, because they know the industry and they know what works. They can help you pin that down. They can help you pin down a title and subtitle. They can help you pin down the structure of the book, the outline of the book. And then they can give you feedback as you are writing. This is what I do in my group program. We all work together and walk through each step of the process to make sure that everything is sound as you're going. Now, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to need an editor at the end. You will still need one. But what I have found, if you have that coaching in the beginning, you don't need as much editing. There isn't as much overhauling on the back end. And oftentimes that costs you less on the back end, because a lot of editors, myself included, charge based on how much work each manuscript requires, because no two are the same. So if your manuscript is in really good shape and it doesn't need a lot of editing, you're going to pay less for that at the end. So it actually ends up being cost effective, really, to work with a coach. And you can pay them hourly and work piecemeal most of the time. Some of them also have packages where you can buy.
Stand by, everyone. I think we're having a little technical difficulty right now, so we'll just wait until Melanie is back. You just never know sometimes with Zoom what's going to happen. Melanie, you're frozen. So go ahead and write your questions. She's going to come back, I think. So if you would write your questions in the chat, that would be great. I have a couple of questions for Melanie when she returns. What are your tips for getting started? What do you suggest during the editing process, which she actually just talked about a little bit? And if someone has started a book but hasn't finished, what would you suggest? I know that was in the chat. And then we'll also clarify about ebooks and also about the 500 versus 5,000 question that several of you wanted to know, including myself.
500 versus 5,000.
Yeah, so hi Melanie, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I got knocked off entirely there for a few seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, so why don't you go back and finish this slide, and then we'll I think we'll go into questions after your slide presentation is done.
Yeah, I'm almost done actually.
Wonderful.
I just wanted to say a little something about ghostwriters. If you feel like you are just terrible at writing, you might want to work with a ghostwriter who's someone who takes your expertise and then turns it into a book for you. That is the most expensive thing that you can do to write a book. It is a 5-figure proposition, but for many of you, it might be, or some of you, that might be a good option. So I just wanted to put that out there about that. And then can we just go to the next slide? Because I just wanted to say that I would love for all of you to feel like this woman. I'd love for you all to write your book and feel like this. Okay, so let's talk about the questions.
Melanie, thank you. So a couple of questions that came up is some people have said that they started a book, but they just haven't tips to get started.
Okay, I missed some of that. Some people started a book and haven't finished it.
No, but what are your tips to get started?
To get started, I think the tips to get started are really to hire a book coach. That's really what I would say. You can also go into my Facebook community, and there are a lot of things in there that can help you. I have an invocation video for your mindset when you sit down to write. And I do talk about outlines in there because you really do need to have an outline. I don't recommend that you sit down and try to write a book like you do your morning pages from the Artist's Way. I mean, you can do that, but you're going to have to then go back and do so much rewriting to figure out how to pull it together, that I think it really works much better if you start to create an outline. In my group program, I have a very specific way of creating your outline that I recommend to people. That's a bit too involved to go into right now, but
but if people have questions about that, they can contact you, right, Melanie? And you
yes,
can walk them
absolutely.
through that so that they understand exactly what's available in your group coaching. A couple of other questions. If someone has started a book but hasn't finished, what would you suggest?
Again, find a coach
Okay.
or an editor. Let them take a look at it and make sure that you're on the right track. And as you know, and I would say do that before you continue writing to make sure that you don't need to rework some of what you already have, to make sure that it's viable. Because like I said, you want your book to be competitive with the best books that are out there. And that doesn't mean that you have to turn your book into something that isn't authentic to you. But I contend that you can make it both marketable and authentic to you. And that's the goal.
That's terrific. One of the things that I wanted to talk about just briefly was the royalty advancement. You said don't worry about that necessarily, because I mean, as I heard from you, there are so many other benefits. If you want to write a book, but don't get that publishing contract, there are so many other benefits, like there's leadership role, you know, putting together a podcast in addition. Do you feel that that's accurate?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking.
So you mentioned that, you know, so few people get that royalty in advance or will sell as many books, you know, to pay off that royalty, right? But there are so many other benefits to writing a book that are outside of that initial piece. So don't get disappointed by that necessarily.
Don't get disappointed by that. Writing a book is not a big money-making thing for most people.
Right.
The book itself is not. As I said, it's a robust business card. Right. So it's the money you can make from that business card by doing other things that it affords you the opportunity to do. The book itself, I would say, don't count on making money from that. Some people do, but that's not really, I think, what it's for. I think it really is for, if you're thinking about money, it's about making money on the back end. But I think it's really about the personal satisfaction and about helping people.
Terrific. And then just a couple of other questions. Do you look at an ebook in the same way that you do it as a paperback book or a hardback covered book?
I think you certainly can. I think ideally you would do both.
But what if somebody wanted to start with an ebook? What would you recommend?
I think it's perfectly fine to start with an ebook. It's perfectly fine. It's much more economical. You don't have to even buy an ISBN number, which is something that you have to buy when you do a print book. It's just the little number, you know, on the back by the barcode. Right. You have to pay a little money for that. That identifies your book from every other book out there. So that's one of the little expenses of doing that. But if you just do an ebook, you don't have to. I have an ebook out there. It was my first foray in self-publishing, and I haven't done a print version of it. So it's a perfectly viable way to step into the publishing world.
Terrific. And then we had a question. You had mentioned that if you self-publish and you sell X number of books, then you might be able to get a contract. You said 500 and you said 5,000. Which number is it?
Did I say 500? I did not mean to. I meant 5,000.
Okay, that's okay. We wanted to clarify.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
I meant okay. 5,000 sounds more accurate.
Yes, so it is 5,000.
Yeah, Melanie, thank you so much for your time today. Before we leave, I want to ask you 4 quick questions. And so just really like rapid fire here. First one is, what do you revel in?
What do I revel in? I revel in watching people write books and feel wonderful about them.
And
That's one thing.
who is a woman that inspires you and why? Just quickly.
Right now, I think I would say Simone Biles
Absolutely.
because of how she took care of herself during the Olympics. I thought that was amazing.
Terrific. And what is a daily ritual that you can't live without?
Daily ritual that I can't live without. Not very ritualistic, actually. You know what? I don't know.
Have that cup of coffee in the morning or tea? No.
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I guess I am. Yeah, I really don't think I have one.
Okay. And that's just fine. And the last question is, what would you say to your 25-year-old self?
Oh, yeah, I think I answered that in that thing you asked before. I think I told her not to worry so much about things, that things will be all right.
Terrific. Thank you so much for playing with me today and being here. It's so nice to have you as an industry expert tell us so much today. And, you know, the publishing industry is just such a huge question for so many people. So thank you for clarifying that for us as well. And with that, I'll toss it over to Monica.